My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and I used to believe marriages don't fall apart during loud arguments. They fall apart in the quiet moment when one person is still standing in the same house, but has already started leaving in their mind. I've never been the kind of person who thinks love needs to be loud to be real. I never believed a strong marriage had to be constantly proven through grand gestures or repeated declarations. To me, marriage survives on alignment, the quiet certainty that two people are still choosing the same life, the same direction, the same future. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be constantly happy. But it does have to be respectful, stable, shared. Ethan and I had been married for 6 years, and for most of that time, our life looked like the kind of marriage no one questions. We weren't dramatic. We didn't fight often. We had routines, responsibilities, and a rhythm that felt dependable. Every morning, he made black coffee while I opened the kitchen window just enough to let fresh air in. At night, we ate later than most because his work usually stretched past dinner. On weekends, I handled the house while he disappeared into the garage or sat in front of his laptop for hours, like finishing one more thing might make the next week lighter. Everything had its place. Everything made sense. Stable enough that no one would think to look closer. But stability doesn't always mean something is working. Sometimes it just means nothing has been pushed hard enough to break yet. The change in Ethan didn't happen all at once. That's why I ignored it at first. It started small, easy to dismiss. At first, it was just the way he spoke. The tone no longer matched the words. He still asked about my day, still sat across from me at dinner, still showed up where he was supposed to. But there was distance underneath it, not obvious, just slightly out of sync. One night, he leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at a glass in his hand. "I'm tired," he said. I asked if it was work. He nodded, but not convincingly. A few days later, it shifted. "I feel stuck," he said. That word didn't sound like him. Ethan wasn't someone who used heavy language for temporary feelings. I asked if he meant work, routine, or stress. He shrugged like even he didn't want to define it too clearly. Then it got heavier. He said he didn't feel like himself anymore. He said something about his life felt incomplete, like he was moving forward without understanding why. I remember one night clearly. I was folding towels in the laundry room when he stood in the doorway watching me for a moment. "Do you ever feel like you're just continuing without knowing why?" he asked. I stopped. "Why are you asking that?" He hesitated. "I don't know, just thinking." I should have pressed further. I should have followed that moment all the way to the truth instead of letting it dissolve into something vague and manageable. But when someone you love is still there, still eating dinner with you, still sleeping beside you, still showing up in every frame of your life, it's easier to believe the discomfort is temporary. A phase, stress, something that will pass on its own. That's what I told myself. I thought Ethan was going through something internal. Something quiet that would resolve with time, rest, maybe a conversation or two, maybe a short trip to reset. I didn't realize that while I was calling it a phase, he was already turning it into a conclusion. Everything changed on a night that looked completely ordinary. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no breaking glass. Just a conversation in our kitchen, under warm lighting, surrounded by things that felt so familiar they almost made the moment feel safe. Ethan stood across from me, both hands resting lightly on the counter. He looked calm, too calm. "I've been thinking for a while," he said. I didn't interrupt. He looked down, not at me, but somewhere between us, like he was avoiding the weight of what he was about to say. "This marriage," he paused, exhaled slowly. "It feels like a trap, like something heavy, like I fell into it without realizing how deep it was." I said nothing, not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. He continued in the tone of someone who had already rehearsed this in his head. "I need to step out of it, to find myself again, alone. Not by trying harder, not by fixing it together. I need to do this on my own. Alone. Not us, not together, just him." There are moments in life where your body understands the truth before your emotions do. I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel explosive. I didn't feel tears rising the way people expect you to when someone you've been married to for 6 years tells you your marriage is something he needs to escape. I just felt clear. Because he wasn't asking for help. He wasn't opening a conversation. He wasn't saying, let's fix this. He was delivering a decision he had already accepted long before speaking it out loud. And in that moment, something else became clear too. He thought he could redefine our marriage without immediately changing what it was. He thought he could say he needed out while the structure stayed in place, while the support remained intact. He thought the decision would be his, and the consequences could wait. I looked at him for a few seconds. Then I said quietly, then go. There was no hesitation in my voice, no anger, no softness, just a direct response to what he had already decided. And for a brief second, I saw it. Not panic, not yet, but a shift. A pause he hadn't prepared for, like he expected questions, maybe an argument, maybe something that proved I was still holding on to what he had already let go of. But I didn't give him that. Because once someone describes your marriage as something they need to leave alone, it has already changed. Not after another conversation, not after therapy, not after time, right there, in that kitchen, in that sentence. The rest of the night passed quietly, but not normally. He went upstairs earlier than usual. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to, my hand resting against the cold countertop, watching the light reflect across the surface as if I might see the exact moment everything shifted. I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt calm, and that calm told me something important. By morning, I was going to start changing everything, not as a reaction, but as a continuation of the choice he had already made. I didn't sleep much that night, not because my mind was racing. It wasn't. There was no spiral of what-ifs, no replaying his words, no attempt to reinterpret them into something softer. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't trying to understand the situation anymore. I already did. Ethan hadn't asked for space in the way people usually mean it. He hadn't said, let's figure this out. He had described our marriage as something he needed to step out of by himself. Once something is defined that way, the rest becomes simple. So I got up, made my coffee like I always did, opened the kitchen window like I always did, and started making decisions. Not impulsively, not emotionally, logically. The first thing I did was cancel the Portland trip. We had planned it weeks earlier. It was supposed to be a reset. His idea, actually. A way to step away from routine and reconnect. At the time, I believed him. I thought it meant he still saw us as something worth stabilizing. But that context no longer existed. You don't go on a trip to fix something one person has already decided to leave behind. So I opened my email, found the confirmation, and canceled it. No rescheduling. No message to him, no discussion, just a clean removal. Because once a shared direction disappears, shared plans lose their meaning. After that, I called a lawyer before lunch. Not because I was rushing into anything dramatic, but because clarity requires preparation. I explained the situation simply, no exaggeration, no emotion layered into it. Just the facts as they existed. My husband had said he needed to step out of the marriage independently. What did that mean legally? What did I need to understand now, before anything escalated later? The lawyer's response was exactly what I expected. Nothing needed to happen immediately. There was no urgency to file anything, no reason to force a timeline. But understanding the structure ahead of time mattered. Because once someone defines a marriage as something they need to escape, it's no longer a question of if things will change, only how prepared you are when they do. I ended the call, set my phone down, and stood there in the quiet of the house. It didn't feel chaotic. It didn't feel broken. It felt rearranged. That afternoon passed with very little interaction between us. Ethan stayed in his office longer than usual. When he came out, we exchanged a few normal sentences. Surface level, almost polite. If someone had walked in, they would have thought nothing had happened. But silence like that isn't neutral. It's confirmation. That night I made one final decision. It was small on the surface, quiet, invisible even. But it changed everything that came after. Ethan had booked a personal retreat for himself. He told me about it a few weeks earlier and framed it as something he needed to clear his head, reconnect with himself, and step away from everything for a few days. At the time, I supported it. I didn't question it. Because back then, I still believed we were moving in the same direction. But now that definition had changed. Independence isn't something you take halfway. You don't ask to step out of a marriage alone while still relying on everything that marriage provides. So I logged into the account, reviewed the charges, and removed the access. Not aggressively, not dramatically, precisely. The payment method he had been using, mine, was no longer available. No announcement, no warning, just alignment. If he wanted to do this alone, then he would do it alone. By the end of that day, nothing looked different from the outside. The house was the same. Our routines hadn't visibly changed. There were no raised voices, no confrontations, no dramatic exits. But underneath all of it, the structure had already shifted. The trip was gone. The legal groundwork was in place. And the support he assumed would still exist didn't. I didn't tell him, because final decisions don't need to be loud. The next morning, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw his sister's name, and before I even answered, I already knew. Something on his side had started to fall apart. I answered on the third ring, not out of hesitation, just long enough to let the silence settle on the other end first. "Claire?" Her voice was tight, not angry, not calm, just strained, like she had been pulled into something she didn't fully understand but already felt responsible for. "Yeah," I said. "What's going on?" she asked immediately. "Ethan just called me. He said the Portland trip got canceled, and now his retreat payment isn't going through. He thinks there's some kind of mistake and everything's happening at once. I don't understand." I didn't interrupt her. Questions like that need to finish so you can hear exactly what version of the situation someone else has been given. When she stopped talking, I let a second pass. Then I answered, "There's no mistake." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I mean everything is happening exactly the way it's supposed to," I said, my voice steady. "Ethan made it clear he wants to step out of the marriage on his own. I'm just aligning with that." There was a longer pause this time, not confusion, recognition. Because what I said didn't match whatever explanation he had given her. "That's not what he said," she replied, more quietly now. "I figured." I didn't add anything else. Once you state something clearly enough, repeating it only turns it into a debate. And this wasn't a debate. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. Ethan. This time I answered immediately. "Claire, what's going on?" His voice was different now. Still controlled, but there was urgency underneath it. Something tighter, less certain than the night before. "I don't understand why the trip got canceled," he continued. "And the retreat, there's an issue with the payment. Did something happen?" I leaned back slightly against the counter, letting him finish. Because the way he was asking already told me everything. This wasn't confusion about logistics. This was confusion about my response. "I thought you needed to do this alone," I said calmly. The sentence landed exactly where it needed to. There was a pause. And in that silence, I could almost feel the shift happening on his end. Like something he had said the night before was now coming back to him under a completely different light. "That's not what I meant," he said finally, his tone tightening. "I didn't mean like this. I just needed space, to think, to figure things out." "I gave you space," I replied. Another pause. "This feels extreme," he said. "Canceling everything, cutting things off without even talking to me." "We did talk," I said quietly. "You said you needed to step out of this on your own." "That doesn't mean I'm leaving the marriage," he pushed back. "It doesn't mean I don't—" He stopped himself mid-sentence. Timing matters. And whatever he was trying to say now came after the decision. "That's not how it sounded," I said. "It's not how you're supposed to take it," he replied quickly. I almost smiled at that. "Because that's always the pivot, isn't it? The moment someone realizes their words are starting to have consequences, the meaning suddenly becomes flexible." "I didn't misunderstand you," I said. "I listened." He exhaled sharply. I could hear the edge of frustration building, not because I was wrong, but because I wasn't reacting the way he needed me to. "I wasn't asking to lose everything," he said. And there it was. Not I wasn't trying to hurt you. Not I didn't mean it. I wasn't asking to lose everything. I let that sit between us for a moment before I responded. Neither was I. This time the silence felt like impact. Because for the first time since this started, he wasn't speaking from certainty anymore. He was reacting, trying to adjust, trying to regain control of something that had already moved beyond where he thought it would go. "I think you're overreacting," he said after a moment, but even he didn't sound convinced. "I think I'm being consistent," I replied. "With what?" "With what you said." He didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted again. Slightly, but enough to matter. Because the version of this situation he had built in his head was starting to come apart. By midday, my phone rang again. This time it was his mother. And I already knew before I answered. This wasn't over. I answered his mother's call the same way I had answered the others, calm, steady, without urgency. "Claire," she said, her voice softer than his sister's, more controlled, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Of course there had. There's always a misunderstanding when consequences arrive faster than people expect. "I don't think so," I replied gently. She paused, like she hadn't expected that answer. "Ethan told me what happened," she continued. "He said things came out wrong, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how he is. He gets overwhelmed. He says things without thinking them through fully." I leaned slightly against the counter and let her finish. Because this part wasn't new. This was the soft landing, the attempt to reframe something sharp into something survivable. "He didn't sound overwhelmed," I said. "He sounded certain." Another pause. "He just needed space," she insisted, a little firmer now. "Marriage goes through phases. You don't dismantle everything because of one conversation." There it was again. One conversation. As if that was the problem. As if the weight of what he said could be reduced to timing, tone, delivery, anything except the meaning itself. "I didn't dismantle anything," I said calmly. "I responded to what he defined." "That's not what he meant," she said quickly. "Then what did he mean?" I asked. Silence. Not long, but long enough. Because the truth was simple. Whatever he meant, it wasn't clear enough to stand on its own without being adjusted after the fact. "He didn't want to leave you," she said finally. "He just needed to figure himself out." "I understand that," I said. "Then why are you reacting like this?" I let out a quiet breath. "Because figuring yourself out alone and staying in a marriage that functions like nothing changed aren't the same thing." She didn't respond right away. "He didn't think it would go this far," she said, softer now. That was the closest anyone had come to the truth so far. "I know," I said. And that surprised her. I could hear it in the silence that followed, because people expect anger in moments like this, or hurt, or at least some kind of emotional charge they can work with. But I wasn't offering that. I wasn't trying to convince her. I wasn't trying to pull her onto my side. I was just stating reality. "He loves you," she added after a moment, like that might reset something. "Maybe it used to. But love isn't the same thing as alignment, and it isn't stronger than a decision someone has already made in their mind." "I'm not questioning that," I said quietly. "I'm just not building a life around it anymore." That landed differently. I could feel it, because now this wasn't about defending Ethan. It was about understanding me. And for the first time in the conversation, she didn't try to correct anything I said. The call ended not with agreement, but with something closer to acceptance. Not full, not comfortable, but enough to recognize that this wasn't something she could smooth over with explanation. The next few days passed without confrontation. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, no attempts to force a resolution. And that absence of chaos was exactly what made it final. Because when something is truly decided, it doesn't need noise to confirm it. Ethan still went on the retreat after all, using another card after the original payment was cut off. But he came back earlier than planned. Not because he found clarity out there, because what he left behind didn't stay the same. I heard the front door open late in the afternoon. I didn't go to greet him. I stayed where I was, sitting at the dining table, a glass of water untouched in front of me, listening to the quiet echo of his footsteps moving through the house. He stopped in the doorway a few seconds later, and even without looking up, I could feel it. That hesitation, like he was standing in a space that looked familiar but no longer felt like it belonged to him in the same way. "Claire?" I lifted my gaze slowly. He looked different. Not physically, but in the way people do when they come back expecting something to still be there and realize it isn't. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded once. "Okay." Because there was only one conversation left to have, and neither of us could avoid it anymore. He stepped fully into the room this time, slower than usual, like he was trying to read something in the air before saying the wrong thing again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. His hands rested on the table, fingers loosely interlocked, but I could see the tension in the way they held still, too still. "Is this really how this is going to go?" he asked. His voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't defensive, it was searching. Like he was still trying to find a version of this conversation that led somewhere else. I met his eyes. "Yes." The answer came out simple, clean, no hesitation. He exhaled slowly, looking down for a second before glancing back up. "I didn't think you'd take it this far," he said. There it was again. Not I didn't mean it. Not I was wrong. I didn't think you'd take it this far. "I didn't take it anywhere," I replied. "You did." A flicker of frustration crossed his face, but it didn't last. It faded into something quieter, heavier. "That's not fair," he said. "I was trying to be honest. I was trying to tell you what I've been feeling." "And I listened," I said. "That's not the same as understanding," he pushed back. "No," I said. "It is. It just doesn't lead to the outcome you expected." Silence settled between us again. Not like tension building, more like something sinking. "I wasn't leaving you," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I just needed time, space. I thought—" He stopped himself again, jaw tightening. "You thought everything else would stay the same," I finished for him. He didn't deny it. That was the first real answer he'd given me. "I didn't think I had to lose everything just to figure myself out," he admitted. "That's the part you didn't understand," I said. He looked at me, something unsettled behind his eyes now. "And you did?" "Yes." That answer didn't come with pride or satisfaction, just truth. Because the moment you said you needed to step out of this alone, you already stepped out of it. His expression shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Not confusion, not anger, recognition, like something had finally landed in a way it hadn't before. "That's not what I wanted," he said quietly. "I know." "Then why didn't you fight for it?" The question lingered in the air longer than anything else he had said. Not because it was complicated, but because it revealed something deeper than all the explanations he'd tried before. He didn't just expect me to stay. He expected me to fight to keep him while he was already halfway gone. "I don't fight for something someone is actively walking away from," I said. He swallowed, his gaze dropping to the table again. "I wasn't walking away," he insisted, but there was no weight behind it anymore. "You were," I said gently. "You just didn't think it would feel like this." That landed harder than anything else. I could see it in the way his shoulders shifted slightly, like something inside him had finally given way. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to change the way he was sitting there. The room stayed quiet after that. No more arguments, no more attempts to reframe, because for the first time since all of this started, he wasn't trying to change the meaning anymore. He was sitting with it. "Is there anything left to fix?" he asked after a while. That question came too late. I held his gaze for a few seconds before answering. "It ended when you decided to step out of it alone." I didn't say it harshly. I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it the way you say something that has already happened, something that doesn't depend on whether anyone agrees with it or not. He didn't argue this time. He didn't correct me. He didn't explain. He just sat there, quiet, because for the first time, he wasn't reacting to what he wanted this to be. He was seeing it for what it already was. 2 months later, everything was quieter. Not in the way people imagine after something ends. No dramatic aftermath, no constant replaying of what happened, no lingering chaos that refuses to settle. Just quiet. Life didn't collapse. It adjusted. The house felt different at first. Not emptier, just clearer. Like something that had been stretching across the space had finally been removed, and everything left behind no longer had to accommodate it. My mornings stayed the same. Coffee, open window, fresh air. But the silence wasn't something I had to fill anymore. It was something I could sit in without questioning. Work moved forward. Days passed without needing to be measured against anything else. I didn't feel the urge to explain the situation to anyone, not because I was hiding it, but because there was nothing confusing left to explain. The story was simple. Ethan said he needed to step out of the marriage to find himself, and I made sure he understood what that really meant. I heard, through people who still spoke to both of us, that he tried to explain things differently afterward, that it had been a misunderstanding, that it wasn't supposed to go this far, that he never intended for everything to change the way it did. But explanations don't rewrite outcomes, not once decisions have already been made. That's the part people struggle with the most. They think intention matters more than timing, more than clarity, more than the moment something is said out loud. It doesn't. Because once you tell someone you need to step out of their life, even temporarily, you're not just describing a feeling, you're changing the structure that holds everything together. And structures don't stay intact just because you decide later that you didn't mean to break them. I wasn't angry at him. That surprised people more than anything. They expected bitterness, or resentment, or at least some version of me that was still emotionally tied to what had happened. But I wasn't, because anger requires you to still be holding on to something, and I wasn't holding on anymore. What I felt instead was something much simpler. Certainty. There were no dramatic final conversations after that last one, no sudden realizations, no last-minute reversals. Just distance, real distance. The kind that isn't negotiated because it has already been chosen. Sometimes I think back to that moment in the kitchen, the way he stood there, the way he said it. Calm, controlled, certain. I need to step out of this, alone. At the time, I don't think he understood what that actually meant. He thought it was a pause, a temporary shift, something he could step away from and return to when he felt ready. But that's not how it works. Not when two people are building a life together. You don't get to step out of something like that halfway. You don't get to remove yourself from the commitment and expect the structure to remain exactly where you left it. Because the truth is simple. When someone tells you they need to leave your life to find themselves, the most honest thing you can do is let them. And make sure they understand exactly what leaving really means.